just for our listeners, define what markets we're going to be speaking about and focusing in on today. But where do you see as the pockets of growth and opportunity in regional Northeast markets for Italian wine producers?
Well, I would say like literally any area that's like less than 1 million people in the area. So, just to put it into perspective, Buffalo has about 275,000 residents in the confines of the city.
Okay.
But if you go out a little bit into the county in which Buffalo is in, we're just under 1 million people, and that's just Erie County. And then you have other surrounding counties that will add on to that. So any of those areas, I mean, you're talking Albany, the capital district, Syracuse. Rochester is slightly less populated than Buffalo, but not by a whole lot. Rochester is a great market. I mean, even places like, you had mentioned Hartford, Providence.
Yeah.
I guess Westchester and Long Island are in that mix too, in a sense, but I'd say that they're more tied just based on proximity to the metro area.
Hello, welcome to Masterclass US Wine Market with me, your host, Juliana Colangelo. This show has been designed to demystify the US market for Italian wineries through interviews with experts in sales and distribution, social media, communications, and so much more. We will quiz each of our esteemed guests in every episode to solidify the lessons that we've learned from the episode. So sharpen your pencils, get out your notebooks, and join us this week to learn more about the US market. Hello, and welcome back to Masterclass US Wine Market on the Italian Wine Podcast. Today, we're exploring an important and often overlooked growth opportunity for Italian wine producers, succeeding in smaller regional markets across the Northeast United States. While cities like New York and Boston often dominate our attention, our events, there are powerful opportunities in smaller markets like Providence, Portland, Hartford, Western New York, upstate New York, and smaller metro hubs that have large Italian-American diasporas and where Italian wine can really build more traction. So joining me today, we're excited to have Kevin Di Lucente, a seasoned sales and distribution expert with extensive experience working in the Northeast U.S. markets. Kevin brings a practical boots-on-the-ground perspective on how Italian wines can grow in markets that are competitive but less saturated than major metropolitan hubs. Kevin, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me here, Juliana. It's a pleasure to be here. I've listened to your show a bunch, and I guess I finally get the fortunate opportunity to be here talking to you in person.
Well, yeah, this is exciting, and you look so professional in your setup. So I'm a little bit jealous, to be honest, of the headphones and the mic, but you mentioned you're a musician, so you're well set up for camera.
This is my rig to record, my songs that only myself and my mom care about.
So Kevin, how did you end up working in wine and not being a full-time musician? Tell us your story about how you entered the wine industry.
Well, I actually went to school for theater. I went to UB for theater. I'm born and raised in Buffalo, and I can see the hospital that I was born in from my house that I live in today. So it's very close. I never really went far, although, being in theater and being a musician, you could go pretty far if you wanted to. But I married my high school sweetheart, and we established some very firm roots here in Buffalo. So I didn't grow up in a wine household. I grew up in a Coors Light, cheap schnapps household. And my wife and I started getting curious about wine when we were in college and slightly beyond. I was actually out of theater school. I worked for an ophthalmologist for 5 years.
Oh, okay.
And I had zero need to wear glasses. I was somehow teaching people how to put contact lenses in and take them out, and I didn't even know how to do it myself. So I started getting curious about following my passions outside of theater, and certainly eyeglasses were not a passion. So I wound up taking a part-time job at a wine shop that was just opening up in the city here. And about 2 weeks after I started, the owner asked me if I wanted to transition to full-time. And without even asking my wife, I said, absolutely, I do. And then I worked there for a few years, tasted some of the world's best wines, cut my teeth, got my CSW during that time, and then found my way into working for a small importer distributor, David Bowler Wine, for a couple years. And then I transitioned to Winebow, and I've been at Winebow for almost 12 years now. So
amazing. Okay. And with Winebow, just so our listeners know, explain to us your role and the areas that you're covering.
Well, basically for Winebow, I'm a boots on the ground sales rep. My role at David Bowler had me in a much broader area in New York. I was going all the way over to Ithaca, Syracuse, Rochester, Finger Lakes area. My territory now is actually smaller, but I still go a pretty good distance. I go all the way up to, Niagara Falls area, all the way down to the Pennsylvania border and down over south and east to Olean.
Okay.
So I'm used to these little kind of like islands within rural New York and more populated areas, of course, too.
Right, absolutely. So boots on the ground sales for two different importers and distributors at this point, but still always covering focused upstate New York and broader area. So, Kevin, today on the podcast, our key takeaways for our listeners are going to be number one, why smaller Northeast markets offer high potential growth for Italian wines. Number two, how to adapt your portfolio, pricing, positioning to fit these regional trade opportunities. Specifically, we'll focus in on upstate New York. And finally, what producers have to understand about distribution and sales velocity when it comes to outside metro markets like upstate New York. So let's start broadly. When Italian producers think about the US, they usually think New York, Miami, California. Why should they be paying attention to some of these smaller metro markets? And specifically, let's focus in on upstate New York.
Well, I would say that obviously there's a romance and a glamour to, if I was a small producer outside of the US, I'd be like, I want my wines in New York. Of course you do. But I think that you could enter the market more smartly and more stably if you establish yourself in these smaller markets first, and then you scale up from there. I think a lot of people or a lot of producers, they come in and they want to see all the major players in New York right away, and they're just not ready to enter the market in that way. But if they kind of establish a solid business in areas that actually have time and care about them, and I'm not bashing on larger metro areas or New York at all, because obviously they're amazing markets and I'd be fortunate to be in those markets myself. But, I think that they could be a little more realistic, and, their timeline should be a little bit longer than just coming into New York thinking they're going to have immediate success and then off and running.
Right, absolutely. And when you say they're not ready for the maybe major metro market, what do you mean by that, Kevin?
Well, I would just say that they might be overwhelmed. If they're coming in and they get kind of swept up in the glitz and glamour of all these places, they may not have even at the winery, the infrastructure to support all that growth in such a huge way. And honestly, they'd be lucky to even have that amount of success initially. I think if it's more of a slow burn, they have a way to prepare themselves in a more controlled manner as time goes on.
Right, and scale more sustainably. That makes total sense. So talk to us, Kevin. Let's just, for our listeners, define what markets we're going to be speaking about and focusing in on today. I know you mentioned where your background lies, but where do you see as the pockets of growth and opportunity in regional Northeast markets for Italian wine producers?
Well, I would say like literally any area that's like less than 1 million people in the area. So, just to put into perspective, Buffalo has about 275,000 residents in the confines of the city.
Okay.
But if you go out a little bit into the county in which Buffalo is in, we're just under 1 million people, and that's just Erie County. And then you have other surrounding counties that will add on to that. So any of those areas, you're talking Albany, the capital district, Syracuse, Rochester is slightly less populated than Buffalo, but not by a whole lot. Rochester is a great market. Even places like, you had mentioned Hartford, Providence.
Yeah.
I guess Westchester and Long Island are in that mix too, in a sense, but I'd say that they're more tied just based on proximity to the metro area.
Right. You might have the same rep covering or yeah, exactly. They're kind of have some spillover.
Yeah.
So talk to us through, how do these smaller markets, Albany, Buffalo, Erie, these areas, upstate New York, how do they differ from a metro New York market?
Well, I would say that in certain cases, there's less representation. There's all the same companies. There's a lot of smaller companies that only focus themselves on the metro area, but there are a lot of reps that are constantly swarming around.
Okay.
So there's still similarities to the metro market in that regard, but I would say the buyers have more time for you.
Okay.
They're more willing to receive out of market guests. They're more excited about that. Whereas I think that in the metro area, there might be more of an inundation of constant supplier after supplier. Okay, we get it. It's another winemaker. Whoop-de-doo. Whereas out here, I noticed that people are more excited to sit down and meet with them. They're more excited to work with them on events, wine dinners, private tastings.
Okay. So they're more the accounts themselves, the retailers, the restaurants, they're more eager and more excited and open to working with producers on collaborating on a marketing initiative or, like you said, a winemaker dinner or program because they're not as saturated, it sounds like.
Yeah, and that's kind of where some of the opportunity comes, is because you have this willingness to participate. You have the opportunity to create a great relationship. And out here, buyers can be very loyal, and that could be
Mhm.
the start of a beautiful relationship between a producer and retail or on premise.
Yeah, so you can build some really like long established strong relationships. What would you say right now are some of the sweet spots in terms of let's go through kind of the four P's of marketing, but let's start with price point for Italian wine in these upstate markets. What price point, let's talk FOB here to the buyer as well. So we're in those terms. What price point is really the sweet spot at this point?
Well, I would say for Italian wine, probably between $14.99 and $19.99 is probably the sweet spot, because if you're less than that, it's probably, there's very few and far people, especially with the tariffs now, that are able to price their wine, in that regard. Not to say that they're not there, because certainly they are. Pinot Grigios are in that realm.
Yeah.
But I would say that that's probably the sweet spot. And then once you get over 1999, it's a different territory. It's more what they would call a premium price point. And then if you're going over 30, that's a hand sell. That's a legit hand sell, and has to be in the very right hands in order for that to be successful, or
Okay.
have just such, textbook history that the wine is an example of excellence in whatever region it's coming from.
Totally, that makes sense. So 14.99 to 19.99 is really that sweet spot for a price point on the shelf that the consumer is excited to try it or sees, is likely to pull it off the shelf, essentially.
Yeah, and then psychologically, it's it puts it in a place where they still think that it's relatively affordable. And if you're wine that drinks incredible for $17.99, people will be very excited and think that they found something of value.
Right. Absolutely. That makes sense. How about regionally or varietal wise? What right now is exciting or trending in upstate New York for Italian wine?
Well, trends are very interesting in this area, and I've been around long enough to see a shift in the delay in which trends come out of the major markets.
Okay.
If I could give an example, the whole cocktail bar scene, mixology, that whole thing was well established in New York before it was in Buffalo. I remember,
Hmm.
I think the first really true cocktail bar that was doing innovative things that would, rival or at least rub elbows with what was going on in New York was late 2000s into the
Oh, wow.
2008, 2009. And I would say now, though, with more social media, that's a much more immediate thing where trends are transitioning over.
Right. That's a great point. Social media has made everything a lot more visible. You
Yeah,
don't have to go and actually visit somewhere to understand maybe what's happening if you're following these bars and these, influencers on Instagram.
right. Certainly, a lot of these markets, though, are commodities markets, and that is also a challenge in
Okay.
general, is because the big brands rule.
Yeah.
And you still need to find the right homes for these wines. There are these homes for these wines. You just need to do a little bit more work to uncover that and build those relationships. Because once you have the relationships, and then you're going to have the machine working for you once you have fans and advocates.
Absolutely. When you say, I think that's a really good point, Kevin. When you say commodity market, explain like how you're defining that.
Well, I don't want to bash any brand, because I think there's a place for everything.
Of
My mom and dad will text me quite often. They live down in Florida now. They're retired, but with is this wine good?
course.
And whatever it is, 9 times out of 10, it's one of those big brands that sells thousands of cases. And I always respond, I'm like, do you like it?
It's a great response.
Yes, I love it. Well, then you don't need my opinion, Mom. You don't need my opinion, Dad. So
Yeah, you're drinking wine. That's good, right?
yeah,
Like the baseline.
and a lot of these, let's say it's a retail store, they don't want to walk away from that business, so they're going to have all these commodities
Of
brands
course.
that
Yeah.
keep the lights on, keep people coming in. Unfortunately, in that realm, you have to sometimes work on a lower margin because you're having to be price competitive. And that's another benefit to a value proposition for these Italian wine producers, is you can have them build these brands and set the pricing and operate at a higher GP with these if they're hand selling away from these big commodities brands, which
Hmm.
every single retail store should be having an initiative to do this, because that's how you're going to increase your profits. If you're going to have to play in the commodities realm, which they almost all do, there's very few bottle shops around here that have the integrity to just say, no, I don't want to carry this, I don't want to carry that.
Right. You still have to run a business and
Right.
turn a profit. So yeah, so it's also where in New York you do find like specialty retailers, a lot of them that don't sell any commodity driven brands. They're all selling niche small producers. It sounds like the upstate market, it's more of a mix, like stores and retailers and restaurants that are going to have a mix of some of your commodity. And I think that's a word we can all understand what that means, but commodity driven label and then also some new and emerging labels.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's good to know, like structurally. So then talk to us about what is happening regionally and varietally within Italian wine in these upstate markets.
Yeah, I mean, I would say we're still relying upon the major historical regions, Tuscany,
Okay.
Piedmont, obviously Prosecco and Pinot Grigio are big categories. I do have a lot of people that are willing to be more experimental, and maybe it's because I'm such a nut for Italian wine myself, and it's hard for me to see outside of my own bubble because I'm constantly out here championing Italian wine. But I'm selling things like, Suso Magnello from Puglia, and it's finding success in homes in one of my biggest retail stores.
That's great.
And maybe it's because I've kind of not me. This is not entirely me. This is just the romance of Italian wine coming through. One of my favorite things to share about Italian wine, and is a statistic I think I learned it in VIA, is that in the U.S. 90% of the wine is made with 9 varietals.
Wow.
In France, 90% of the wine is made with 12 varietals, so slightly more. But
Yeah.
in Italy, 90% of the wine is made with 30 different varietals. So there's so much different at the top end, and the bulk of what's coming out of Italy, there's a lot more choice. And then if you really dive down into the minutia of all these little regions, because Italy is such a regional country, you can find these little geeky wines or geeky grapes that you can, it could be in the middle of nowhere and you could be selling,
Yeah.
Bellone from Lazio. And just because like the wine's good, it may be not as well known, but if you put it in people's glasses and you realize, especially even in restaurants, it didn't really touch much on restaurants, but that's a huge home for Italian wine, because there's such a tie-in to the food and wine culture in
Of course.
Italy. And you can have a lot more people willing to feature these wines, even if it is just for a short time. But then that creates this little commercial for that wine in that region. So
Right. And you might get, I imagine there's even a lot more loyalty in restaurants upstate, New York, that's like an opening and a closing every day. I'd imagine there's a little more continuity in the restaurant scene upstate. What would you say?
yeah, I mean, there's still openings and closings.
Of course.
It's a risky business. Everyone knows that. I mean, but I would say that it is even more reliant on the relationship. So that's another reason why, if you come into the market and you do a wine dinner, and maybe you come into the market with frequency in the way that you can. I mean, there's barriers there. So let's say you have a distributor that is trying to protect its reps from someone coming and working with them every month or every week, which I'm sure they're being constantly inundated by suppliers. So there's that barrier there. So let's say you're able to convince them that you're going to come in and work twice a year, once with a rep, once independently. That's probably enough to, as long as you're doing it several years in a row and making your visits efficient, that's enough to create a strong base of relationships. Certainly if you can do it more, if you have more of a, in some of these smaller importers, if they have someone that is out there and they have someone distributing for them, which Weinbo does a lot of distribution for smaller importers, and they have their own importer reps that can kind of go around and be another set of arms and hands. And that's strong, but you also have to be sensitive to the relationship between the supplier and the distributor. You don't want to be overstepping your bounds and creating tension between the rep and the supplier.
And that comes to like the fundamentals of just understanding 3-tier system and how that works, and the relationship chain, more so to speak, right? And all those chains. Yeah, absolutely. But like you said, I mean, it seems like there's a lot of opportunity to create loyalty and create trial if you invest in some of these markets outside of Metro New York, upstate, et cetera. where they're not as inundated with suppliers and producer visits. And there are people drinking good wines, excited to try new wines and explore esoteric and lesser known varietals. So it seems like it's ripe for opportunity.
Yes, it absolutely is. And we're fresh off of the social media influencing things in a way that really there's almost zero delay in trends now. So you're just kind
Yeah.
of everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to reiterate. Everyone's on the same page. There's more sharing of information. Social media is almost egalitarian, democratized in a way trends that they spread a lot more quickly. So there's no need to think like you have to make a specific new label or different wine for these markets. It's like just going there and exposing, the buyers to your products.
Yeah, indeed.
What would you say are some common mistakes that you've seen any producers make when entering the upstate market? Is there anything to be on the watch out for?
Really, the only thing I can say there is that many of these people I've only ever seen once. They come one and done, and they think that, okay, so you activate the market. They think that's the finish line. That's not the finish line. That is the start of a long journey, a long marathon, and they're not willing to put in the time. And maybe, I have to be sensitive to this fact too. Maybe they just don't have the budget to continually visit the market too. That's another
Yeah.
thing that maybe these producers that are trying to enter the market are trying to do it too soon. And I don't know, they need to build that into their budget in order to be successful. Is like, we need to have a plan to visit these or visit these markets, these smaller markets that could be very fruitful and could create a very strong foundation. But that is the biggest mistake, is like, I'd love to see you again. I'd love to see you next year. People
Yeah.
loved when you came in. Like, you're charming. And, most Italians are charming.
Of course. Yeah.
And they don't come back. Maybe it's something I said. I don't know.
But it's like you said, there needs to be some continuity. So a mistake is, don't just expect to come once and see some things sticking. Like you have to revisit.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, of course, I'm going to continue to champion the wines and, especially Italian wine myself, but all reps are not created equal. We all have different interests, and there's some
Right.
Francophiles out there that may just be like, yeah, some Italian guy came to visit me, whatever, I don't care.
But yeah, creates a plan of continuity. And I, would add too, and I don't know if you'd agree, but nowadays too, like, yes, being in person is important, but there's also continuity. You can develop communication with social media, with email, with other communication tools. So perhaps there is opportunity, even if you can't get there physically, to be better about follow-up. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And you certainly would know a lot more about that than I would, but I would agree that I make sure that all my market visit suppliers and winemakers, they all have a list of the contacts of the people that we saw.
Good.
And I
Mhm.
rarely hear about any follow-up. I think that there's something in that. Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. So follow up, even if you can't get there physically,
Right.
follow up virtually, at least at the bare minimum, that you're following up on those markets. Let's talk a little bit about the future. Where do you see the Italian wine category going in upstate New York and some of these regional smaller markets?
It's not going anywhere. I know that, based on the, you said, diaspora of Italian Americans. I'm one of them. I have my dual citizenship with Italy just because
Very
my
nice.
great
Congrats.
grandfather came over in 1920. And, I mean, there's a huge romantic link between Italian Americans and their ancestors. And that's why tourism over there is so popular. I've been over to the town that my great grandfather came from twice.
Wow, very cool.
And that's a huge, people are making that pilgrimage back to where they came from, or where their family came from in Italy. So I think that is just going to be exploited more, the link between the heart and these wines. And it's easy to talk about. For those who love history and story and sense of place, there's infinite possibility within Italian wine. And because there's so much different grape varietals and styles of wine, there really is something for everyone. And if trends change, Italy will have something to meet that trend.
Absolutely. And there's no end of opportunity. So, well, that's good. It sounds like it's a bright future then, and there's opportunity to continue to invest. So, thank you, Kevin, for sharing kind of everything you have told us today about the market and your experience. Is there anything you would want to add that we didn't cover?
No, I don't think so. I would just say that, if you're an Italian producer, you're not yet in the US market, think about a way to come into the US market by way of these smaller markets. I mean, I think that's a good starting point, and I would recommend it if I was a smaller producer. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, we'll do our rapid fire quiz we do at the end of every episode. If you can do your best to answer these questions in just a couple sentences, that would be great. Question number 1. What is your number 1 tip for mastering the U.S. wine market?
Show up with consistency.
Consistency. Yeah, absolutely. That was a great theme throughout our conversation. Number 2, what is something you might have told your younger professional self about selling Italian wine in the U.S. market?
Oh, goodness. I would say maybe very early on, I was very geeky and I would over present. So I would just tell my younger self, just learn your buyer a little bit and read the room.
Read the room. Less is more sometimes.
Yeah, I mellowed out over time, but like
Yeah.
initially I was like really like, wow, there's the parts per million of SO2 in this wine is.
Wow. Parts per million. Yeah, that's getting pretty granular.
Yes, it is.
I would say so. All right. We'll keep it simple. That's a good piece of advice. And then finally, what is one of your favorite travel hacks when you're doing market work or traveling for work?
Well, I would say, I've been to Italy a whole bunch, and I would say that the biggest travel hack that I've been able to create is just getting Nexus. Are you familiar with Nexus?
Like the network?
So Nexus is a expedited passage that you can get through the U.S. and Mexican border.
Oh, okay.
I used to go to Toronto a lot because Buffalo and Toronto are quite close. It takes like an hour and a half to drive from Buffalo to Toronto.
Okay.
So I was big into improv comedy. I've been to New York to take
Oh,
the program
cool.
at UCB and Second City up in Toronto. But anyway, one thing I learned after getting Nexus, and this was a byproduct of it, is that it also comes with TSA PreCheck and
Okay.
global entry.
Oh, amazing.
Which is amazing because if you've ever come back from Italy and then you are tired and exhausted and you see that big long line,
Oh, gosh. Yep.
you just skip it. You skip it. You go right
Yeah.
into the global entry, you scan your face, you talk to one agent, and then you're in the baggage area before you know it. So,
Amazing. Okay. So it's like an expedited entry service.
yes.
I've never heard of that one. I have to look into it. Well, that's a great tip. Thank you, Kevin, again, so much for joining us today on the Italian Wine Podcast. How can our listeners follow along and check out what you're up to?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, as many professionals are. And if you want to check out my music, I'm on Spotify under Lost in the Barrens. It's very poor home recordings that were recorded on this microphone.
Amazing. Very cool. Love multi-talented Italian wine ambassadors. So that's awesome. Thank you again, Kevin. It was great to have you here today.
Oh, the pleasure was mine. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today. Stay tuned each week for new episodes of Masterclass US Wine Market with me, Juliana Colangelo. And remember, if you've enjoyed today's show, hit the like and follow buttons wherever you get your podcasts.